Hola! Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm so excited to be back with everybody in virtual Rio. It's an honor to be here among all of the incredible creative talents and change makers who are leading the way towards a more equitable, sustainable, and regenerative fashion future. I'm especially excited to dive into today's conversation, which will focus on designing for change. It is a big topic with many dimensions to be considered. From addressing damaging and depleting manufacturing and distribution systems, transforming a garment across its life cycle with innovative materials, to the use, reuse, and regenerating of clothing so that we can lessen, if not eliminate, the impact of that garment on people and planet. We will also look at transforming the role of fashion designers and how they are expanding into activism and leveraging their voices and creativity to communicate new pathways for a sustainable fashion future. I'm very, very lucky to have two women who are pioneers in the industry. From creating global movements, plural, to redesigning systems, plural, to leading the way and accelerating the urgent need for changing this broken system, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Ursula de Castro, founder and global creative director of Fashion Revolution, and Dr. Christina Dean, founder and co-chair of Redress and the founder of the R Collective. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's a super pleasure. It's really nice to be here with friends to talk about such an important topic.
Yes, thank you so much. So that being said, you're friends, we want to get to know you. So I'm going to do something a little bit untraditional, and I would like to start with Ursula.
So I am actually originally a designer, and I started working in fashion a little bit accidentally in 1997 when I started a brand called From Somewhere. And the ethos of the brand was always that of reusing. I mean, to be honest with you, this was 1997, sustainable fashion didn't exist, upcycling hadn't really been probably coined but not used. And the concept of reusing for me was very much steeped in my creativity and the stories that these fabrics and materials made me think of and how I could recreate something else with them rather than letting them go to waste. The brand was not my own name. I was very much behind the scene, and my journey starts creative, but the brand was in its own little niche successful. We were selling internationally. We were worn by Carrie on Sex and the City. We sold in Tokyo, Milan, New York, Paris, blah, blah, blah. And therefore I made product, and therefore I saw waste because my product was made 100% from that waste. So we went from secondhand clothing sort of markets, flea markets, to warehouses, enormous warehouses in Prato where we were collecting big bales of stuff. And then I discovered what was discarded by the factories in the first place, so pre-consumer waste. My luck being from Venice, in the region near Venice, near Vicenza, there is some of the best manufacturers in the world. I mean, really, really luxury, high-end. And that's how I started knocking on the back door and, saying, do you have any waste that I could take?
Were you walking into the design with this this mindset of I'm going to design with waste, or how did that come about? I guess, how did you get there?
I refused to design new because I didn't know how to. I mean, when you start transforming from secondhand, the concept of a fresh new roll of fabric is terrifying because all your design brain is used to doing is putting something next to the other and then cutting something off, adapting and transforming along the way. So when I saw the offcuts, which was for years my main somehow material, my brain understood immediately how you could put together a little piece of knit with another little piece of knit and then put something underneath it. If you'd given me a roll, I wouldn't, at that time, I wouldn't have known what to do with it. Anyway, it was successful. It was niche. We sold in places like Henry Bentel's in New York and Takashi Mayer, and we then did some really interesting collaborations with Robe di Kappa. I did a completely bonkers collection with Speedo, cocktail dresses, swimwear, and with Topshop as well. At the same time, in 2006, I co-founded Estetica, which was the first sustainable area inside London Fashion Week, with Anna Orsini, with my partner Filippo Ricci, and with the British Fashion Council. Estetica also ran until around 2014, same time as the brand. And again, that also strengthened this journey that I was on about sustainability and so on and so forth. Then Rana Plaza collapsed. Mm-hmm. Then I realized that yes, my creativity, my understanding of this issue from a creative point of view was interesting and it was important, but there was a lot more that needed to be done because there is so much more to redress. And together with Carrie Summers after Rana Plaza, we founded Fashion Revolution, which is now probably the biggest or one of the biggest fashion activism movements in the world. We have a presence in 92 countries, of which I would say an enormous presence in Brazil, which is why I'm so happy to be here and to thank the team because, you know, we really are our teams. They are the revolution. And so Fashion Revolution has been going till 2014, really, when we first campaigned on transparency, on the environment. Our hashtag, Who Made My Clothes, was used millions of times. And then my new thing is that I have written a book, which is called Loved Clothes Last, and which will be published by Penguin Life in February. I have 4 children and 2 and I've done you the story of my life in less than 10 minutes.
Perfect. Well, there's so much content. I want to go back to the point where you went from designer to fashion revolutionary and spawning this movement. So the question that I have for you is, it's about uptake. I mean, being the first to market in anything is difficult. I mean, coming from the swapper over here, like I was, you know, talking about swapping, nobody wanted to do it. Now, hopefully people want to change. But so with you, what was the uptake like, and were you banging on people's doors trying to get them to think about sustainability, and what was that process like?
Not to begin with. I banged on door trying to make people think about their waste. But I developed immediately very close relationships with the factories. Factories are run by people, and they were very aware of you know. And so the more I became aware of the problem, the more I naturally and instinctively influenced the people that I worked with, whether it was other designers. I mean, we were a fully traveling brand. You know, every season we did London Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week, Milan Fashion Week. So I spoke to an inordinate amount of people about, you know, the issues and delving deeper and deeper. And obviously Estetica then opened my mind as well. But again, you know, it's always hard to talk about a process when you're so well ahead of it, because you're not aware that you're starting a process half the time. Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of, you know, designing my way into a kind of progressive mess. And there was another dichotomy, which was that I adore clothes. I am a collector of clothes. My husband collects records, I have clothes. And I absolutely love the quality. I come from a family of women that were well-dressed, privileged enough to be well-dressed, but also very, very accurate in their choices and meticulous in their care. So I have inherited some extraordinary clothes from generations. So I come from that. I come from deep appreciation. And how can someone like me with this kind of feeling be involved in an industry that is 100% exploitation? I can't. So I have to find my way. And admittedly, 20 years ago, it was very, very difficult to be taken seriously. And I wasn't taken seriously at all for a really long time. I was saved by the fact that I was a good designer and I was selling clothes that were made out of rubbish. People bought them. So at least I had a raison d'etre. But the sustainability, you know, really I can tell you in 2002, in London, 2001, when I was at London Fashion Week, there was absolutely no one talking about it at all. It started a few years later.
So who was this? Did this space have people that were thinking about sustainability in it? Who are your inspirations that, you know, led you to that?
Well, not so much leading, because they were in slightly different field, but I certainly looked up enormously to Linda Gross, to Safia Mini from People Tree, to all of the designers in Estetica, obviously afterwards. But you know, the People Tree was 1995, as was Pachacuti with Carrie Sommers as a brand, and Linda Gross, the work that she did on organic cotton, and other brands such as Alabama Chaining. So there were kind of, you know, heroes. There were people whom I knew were working alongside, you know, in principles and in design as well.
Those brands are still looked at in such high regard, right? Yeah. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I think potentially we're one of the first, together with another brand called Junkie Styling, that really took the upcycling that seriously. But as I said, in isolation and in lots of little pockets, work was being done. But it was very difficult, at least in my case, being bang in the middle of mainstream. So working with the British Fashion Council, you know, selling clothes in all the top boutiques in the world and talk about sustainability. You know, it was harder than it is now.
Another thing that you talk about, which I love in your new book, which by the way, when it comes out, everybody must buy it. I got an early advanced copy, is about it's about the importance and the why we need to care for our clothes. Can you talk about that a little bit, about not just who made my clothes, which is a campaign that you guys have championed and is known the world over and is so incredibly important, but the why. Can you tell us why?
Well, it's common sense, really. There is a real historical need. If you look at the history of fashion, all the things that we're talking about now, somehow we practiced innately. I mean, if you think of transparency, I mean, now, of course, it's a set of tools and a technological opportunity, but in the past, there was an innate understanding of transparency simply because the best wool would come from Italy, but it would be, you know, woven in the UK where the most amazing tailoring was, and you would never consider of buying, you know, a pair of jeans that weren't made in the USA. And so we've always needed to know the provenance and the origin of our clothes, as we also need to know the ingredients in order to care for them. I mean, fashion has not been regulated as an industry, and therefore it's missed out on that instinctive feeling that everyone does when you buy a piece of food. You check whether it's, you know, whether you can eat it, and then you know, in a supermarket or whatever, you will look at the label, you will check whether you would want to know if an apple is organic or not, if you wish to buy the organic one. So with food, there are those labels that allow those process of thinking. So you leave something in the fridge as opposed to outside if you want it to last, etc. It should be exactly the same with fashion. We ought to know that if we're buying something, we ought to have a clear indication if it does contain restricted substances or not. You know, in many cases, because it's deregulated, we don't know this. We actually could have restricted substances is something that, you know, from restricted substances that are banned in Europe, but because the piece was made somewhere else, we have no control. In the care of the clothing, we know that polyester, as many other fibers, shed repeatedly, but polyester is plastic. So we have to be careful about how we wash, and that implies that we need to think about it when we buy it. So the truth is that caring for our clothes implies sentiment, and it implies commitment. And this in turn means that we will buy carefully and care carefully to keep things as long as possible, which is not forever. I mean, you know, really not forever. Clothes, not necessarily forever, but for as long as you possibly can. And when it's over, it's your responsibility how you get rid of it. You know, we must remember that our wardrobe is when we enter the fashion value chain. From then on, everything that we own, it's our responsibility, its impact on this planet. So from the way that we wash it, to the way that we use it, to the way that we dispose it, that process needs to be prolonged as long as possible. Because the reality is, even though the magic word circularity and circular system, again, is something that we previously did but don't do any longer, it's not going to be so easy to make things circular in an industry that has been producing over 150, God knows, billion garment clothing per year for God knows how long. So circularity will take a long time before it's effective and efficient. In the meantime, we can be effective and efficient. And that means understanding our clothes, caring for them, treating them with respect as you would treat with respect the people who made them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I love that you say that too, because I think what people don't really think about is by treating your clothing with respect, not only is it about the process, but it's about the people, which is something that you are so, so wonderful to shed light on the people that power the fashion industry. So by respecting the nature of the clothes and where they came from in the process, you're also respecting the origin of the
Well, it's
hands.
someone's labor. You are respecting someone's labor. I mean, everybody should be toiling in dignity. And reality is that we are buying clothes that are made in utter contempt of humanity and rules. And so, this was the longer and slower road for me understanding really human rights. But the truth is that, respect is probably overused as sustainability. But the reality is that empathy, respect, equity, all of these words we know need to be injected into this conversation. But they're difficult, while acting immediately with the clothes that are in your wardrobe, or the ones that you intend to buy, or the ones that your next door neighbor has, or your sister, that's an immediate step that you can do, and a very good entry point to then understanding the rest of the supply chain, and therefore the people who make our clothes, and the people who spin our clothes and dye our clothes, and the farmers cotton, and so on.
And the relationships, which actually brings me to the relationship that's existing in this conversation right now. Because you and Dr. Christina are close friends, and I think inspiring each other. So Christina, over to you. I know you have a great relationship with, of course, sustainability and your role and what you're playing, but it started with Ursula. Can you share a little bit about that story and how we, Thank you, by the way, Ursula. Thank you.
Sorry, Ursula, I love listening to you, and I've been taking notes about how our lives are very different, but also very similar. And to start really perhaps where they were similar, I met you so many years ago. I don't remember when I was just starting to get very hungry and angry about textile waste. And Ursula has always been a real inspiration for me on this kind of sometimes lonely, kind of dog with a bone path. And so I remember when you were talking about From Somewhere and the collaborations that you were doing with Tesco, I remember, and also Speedo later. These were really big inspirations at the start of my then early days. So no, it's always been a well-trodden friendship that's gone beyond work, and we need to have a personal catch-up, Ursula.
There's not going to be the British Fashion Awards at which we can get drunk at this year, Christine, because that was fun.
Can I come? Okay, so Christina, but then so you have an unbelievable journey yourself, and we want to know. So it started there, but where did you go, and what are the steps that have brought you to where you're at?
Absolutely. I'll give you some few key things. I mean, I'm also have an unusual journey in that I actually am a qualified dentist, and you call me Dr. Christina, and I always want to say, please don't do that. I'm a real phony doctor, but I mean, obviously it is my title, but I was a dentist, and I had, and still have a real passion for public health. And, also when you were talking about how, you had a deep appreciation for the quality of clothes as, a woman growing up, I had a very deep, and do have a deep appreciation of public health. And that has really been at the bedrock of all of my interest in sustainable fashion. And I think had I not been quite expert in public health, I don't think I would have the courage to carry on doing what I'm doing. Wow. So let me explain. So I was a dentist for a few years, hated it. And then I retrained as a journalist in the UK before moving to Hong Kong a long time ago. And I lived in Hong Kong for 12 years. And in the first few years, I had this career sort of transition period, dropping my dental drills and actually writing a lot about public health and pollution in Asia, and specifically in China. And I traveled a huge amount around China writing and sniffing out the issues of pollution. And I was so repulsed by what I found, both visually and also in terms of reports and who I was interviewing, about how little was being done to raise awareness around textile pollution in China specifically. And so in 2007, I started Redress. So Redress is an NGO working to reduce waste and pollution in the fashion industry and to promote the circular economy. And through the 10 years that I was really, really running Redress, I also, again, picking up some of the things that Ursula was saying, I really formed really good relationships and understanding with factories and suppliers, and the real kind of on the ground supply chain that we have in APAC area that's really making the clothes for the world. So basically, throughout my period at Redress, I was working a lot with education, universities, trying to bring in sustainable fashion design curriculums, etc., working with consumers. I mean, that's a whole nother story.
Wow.
Which, yeah. But really what my 10 years at Redress gave me was, I think, a deep incubation period for what I then moved into and now spend like 150% of my time on, which is the R Collective. So
yeah,
I guess, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, started to really just watch the statistics with horror. You know, Ursula already spoke about the 150 billion, gadillion, whatever clothes that we're making. We know that consumption is kind of through the roof, but I was watching it with an APAC lens where we've got a lot of emerging markets. All the statistics were horrifying. And at the same time, there was the kind of rise of purpose-driven business, particularly, I would say, in an Asian context, because the concept of charity in Asia is a bit sort of like orphans and, you know, it's not really business driving change. So to be working in the fashion industry, running a charity really didn't actually resonate with the problem that we had. Yeah. So basically, looking at the problems, which is more waste, more pollution, more consumption, particularly in the APAC area. I went to INSEAD and did a course on social entrepreneurship. And then by hook or by crook, someone should have stopped me. But I started...
No, don't stop you.
I started the R Collective, which is an upcycled fashion brand that rescues pre-consumer textile waste. So in some ways, so inspired by Ursula, you know, a different journey, but constantly weaving with the same kind of heart for change, but obviously doing it in slightly different ways. And so the R Collective works with different wholesalers, Net-a-Porter, Lane Crawford. We were in Barney's before that disappeared. And we are creating a brand to satisfy the women who want to shop, because there are women who want to shop. And it took me a long time to get over my NGO activist kind of hat, which is thou shalt not shop. You know, we shouldn't be doing this. The industry is all wrong. And I've got over all of that. And I've become, I think, much more sensible to understand that the fashion industry plays a tremendous role in our global economy. It's a huge driver for development. It's incredibly important to the livelihoods of, you know, millions and millions of people. And so I've actually learned through my hatred of the fashion industry in my early days, I've come to really love it.
Yeah.
And respect it.
What is it that you love? What is it that you love about what drove you from the hate to the love? How did that relationship happen? What is it that you love so much about?
Do you know, that's really a funny question. What changed my hatred into love is, so I like to do interesting things and to learn. Yeah. And basically a long time ago, I spent a lot of time on landfills because I'm obsessed with waste, and I had been shooting with a TV crew on a landfill. This particular landfill was in Hong Kong, and I had this really big, slap in the face about our overconsumption, watching rubbish trucks, you know, just dumping trash into the landfill. And so I decided for 1 year to only wear clothes that other people had thrown away, as a personal investigation into, like, why do people throw away their clothes? And so essentially every single day I wore a different outfit that I had retrieved from different clothes bins. And that is when I fell in love with fashion.
Wow.
It was 2014. And the reason that I fell in love with it, because I realized how powerful it is to inform, inspire, to change, to talk to people. And it was through being in the bin ultimately, and through living in people's cast-offs, that I understood the power of fashion. And as a result of that, I had so much more empathy with consumers. And actually, then I flipped my brain into thinking, yes, you're a very polluting industry, to actually you're a very beautiful creative industry. Yeah. That as I said, that I now oscillate towards that. And also thinking just, you know, some days I just get very fed up, of course, because what we're all working towards is a tremendously enormous mission. But what I think is very important for all of us to keep remembering is that of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, around 11, I say 11, you say 10, you may say 12, whatever, around 11 of them can be positively impacted by the fashion and textile industry. So it's we should be fighting for that.
Yeah, and I love I love how you've transformed your own vision from from hate to love. And actually now I love the triple bottom line story, and you're developing. And so that development has come out with the awards, right? The Redress Awards, which Ursula is also a part of. So can you tell us, so the trajectory and like how that came about and what you're doing with that?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, Redress developed 10 years ago the Redress Design Award, which is a sustainable fashion design competition for emerging designers, which is where my friendship, I think, with Ursula really, really developed, because she's been our number one judge for every single cycle and has been through us through thick and thin. And you were crazy to take us on when we first launched 10 years ago, Ursula, but that's Ursula in a nutshell. So the competition, why we started it really is because, again, we were looking at this multifaceted, very complicated industry. How the hell do you change it? We know it's, and particularly with an Asian context, we looked at the harsh, horrible, shocking reality, which 13 years ago, and it's definitely better today, but the designers that are coming out of Asian unis had absolutely no clue about sustainable design, anything whatsoever. And I would sort of say they were loaded guns going out into the industry without any understanding. So we started the competition in order to get them going on their careers. And then 10 years on, I mean, we say that we're the largest sustainable fashion design competition in the world, and no one argues with me, but I'm up for a debate if anyone wants one. And the purpose of the competition is really to mainstream sustainable design as a practice, in their entire design careers, whether they stay as designers or they go into different businesses, etc. It's about really embedding it. So essentially our target is the designer itself, but we've also, in terms of trying to develop as much impact as possible, we've also have a teacher training curriculum for the educators at universities, and we have 140 uni partners through whom we give them the information to reach their
and change the system. So that is something we're going to get to in a second. And I want to just, first of all, congratulate the both of you. Mine completely blown. I think we need like 10 more sessions. But we also have an amazing designer who won your awards. We have a video from Juliana Garcia Bella. She won the Redress Award 2020 for women's wear, correct? And she has an amazing process and a beautiful story. So maybe we could watch the video now, and then we'll start to talk about the meat and the heartiness of this conversation. Yeah? Okay, great. So we'll watch.
Hello, my name is Juliana Garcia Bello. I am a clothes designer born in the south of Argentina. Now I live in Netherlands. I moved here to continue with my brand. Mi colección se llama Herencia y está construida a partir de prendas donadas por vecinos y amigos, camisas, jeans y manteles. Para reusar este material, generé un sistema simple basado en la reconstrucción de prendas y en la moldería zero waste. Cada prenda de esta colección tiene características comunes porque son parte de la misma herencia. My advice is try to create connection with your nerdy community and buy local.
Juliana's zero waste and reconstructed collection seeks to repurpose valued yet unwanted clothing donated by the designer's neighbours, building on the designer's interest in embedding storytelling within her creations. This reversible sleeveless shirt, worn with an upcycled tunic, is made using second-hand dress shirts, and the necklace? That's created using second-hand buttons. This reconstructed reversible coat and t-shirt, both made using donated dress shirts, are worn with reconstructed cropped trousers made using second-hand denim jeans. Similarly, this reversible sleeveless shirt is reconstructed from unwanted dress shirts and is worn with a short sleeve upcycled t-shirt and cropped trousers made from second-hand jeans. This upcycled dress panel, created from an unwanted tablecloth, is layered over a reconstructed shirt and upcycled zero-waste crop trousers.
now Juliana joins us live. Hi, Juliana.
Hi.
How are you? So we have one final question for you from our judges, and your question will be asked by Denise Ho, Creative Director at the R Collective.
Juliana, how would you recommend your customers to handle your clothes if they no longer want them? Also, how would you recommend your customers to keep your clothes for a very, very long time?
Well, if the garments are in good condition, the customer can donate to reuse and use the donation. And well, about recommendation, I made a card label because it's important for me that the customer connect with the clothes, repair and use for a long time. And in this way, the clothes are part of your life and history. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo. That was absolutely wonderful. I love the whole aspect of storytelling and regeneration and pulling clothing from your community. That's beautiful. Congratulations. So let's talk about this with the designer from both of your perspective. What's the role of designers now, and how has that changed from years and years ago? What are we looking for designers to do?
Very much the role of the designer for me is that of, apart from creating beauty or function, is that of resolving a problem, so therefore not causing one. Hence the whole concept for me when I was a designer, this idea of recuperating. I do work very, very closely as a mentor, of course, for the runner-up of the Redress Design Award, which I've been doing for 10 years. I've been mentoring pretty much all of them, from every year at the Design Award, but I'm also a visiting fellow at Central St. Martin's, and I've really mentored so many young designers, and I can tell you that this concept of creating to waste is not what people start with. It's not embedded in the way that a designer will start their design journey. They may be lured to the kind of, glamour of fashion and imagine themselves already as the kind of creative director of some sort of conglomeration. But the truth is incredibly different, and the role of the designer, the job of the designer, is much more linked with things that are artisanal than with things that, obviously we're talking about fashion here, but, things that are artisanal, of course, nowadays also industrial. But there is a say that says that 80% of decisions can be influenced at the design table. I don't think that this is true in the case of the modern industry. I think that if we're talking a design studio with a limited production, yes, then that is where the decisions are taken. But unfortunately, the supply chain looks very, very different these days, and these enormous brands have very little connection one department to the other. So often the designer is a figurehead that doesn't really actually decide whether the cotton on the shirt that he's designing will be organic or not. That's somebody else. So this kind of disconnection in the fashion supply chain is where I feel designers have lost a lot of power, and which is why for me, when I mentor, when I teach, what is incredibly important, and the first thing I say is your team, because you're not always going to be able to be in control of everything. In fact, if anything, fashion teaches us the opposite. So the role of fashion designers today is that of creating a team and really understanding and valuing every single aspect that is part of that design. So that is an absolute obligation, I feel. And secondarily, the role of the designer is that of engaging with, in a way with your spirit, the purveyor of clothes, our chosen skin, what we wear. And so to be able, for me, to give their customers 100% the tools to interact with that design in order, as I said before, once that design is yours, the designer themselves can tell you what they wish to be done with that product and how to interact with it for as long as possible.
Christina, so I've got a question for you, because with all the work that you do for the, redress, it relates to COVID and the situation that we're in now. Everything is stopped. The world has stopped. Design has stopped. Everybody's scrambling to try to figure out what's the new way forward. Some might say that this is the perfect time to do a redesign. What do you think about that? And do you think that we can design ourselves out of this mess that we're in right now?
Well, I think that COVID has accentuated the need to define what the role of design is. Now, philosophically, design has to solve a problem. Ursula said that.
Yep.
And if I can just rewind to my experience and my point of view within perhaps a slight Asian context as well, as I don't think that most of the designers coming out of Asia have historically been designing to solve a problem. I personally think they've been designing to create glitter and the glam and the prestige of, being a designer, without really understanding what the purpose of each of the products is. Now, the reason I put it in a slight historical context is right now, we've all had an awakening in every department of our life. And as that relates to designers, I think that there is a really big push to be able to identify, why do we need your product right now? And is it, and does the world need it right now? We've realized this huge oversupply of products. We've also realized that we don't need half of the clothes, perhaps much more than that. We don't actually need the clothes in our closets. And consumers are coming out of COVID with a much more analytical eye. So ultimately, what does that mean for designers? That they better have a damn good idea about what they're going to design. Otherwise, don't bother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or learn to design systems as well, because the reality is that at the minute, as Christina says, we don't need more products, but we do still need ways to enjoy fashion. So again, you're swapping, or the concept of bringing things back, or transforming, or customizing, or reusing. I mean, there is an art to not just have something flimsy out, but really to create this context and this robustness to this product. If you have to bring out a product, then let it have a really robust system, or just design a system, really.
So for smaller designers that are on a smaller scale, it may be easier to control a system and a supply chain because it's a small scale. But how do you apply that to a massive global brand? How do you redesign the system for a massive global brand? Where does that start? You two are experts.
Well, it starts with small steps, and unfortunately it's very, very slow. So if you think that I did a collection for 5 years with Topshop, which opened in 2012, entirely upcycled, made with their factories in Turkey, and that didn't penetrate, even though it was a bestseller that was sold online in New York, in London, and in Hong Kong. These enormous systems are quite impenetrable. And so for me, really, the only thing that will happen is a generational change, is that we are seeing the people I am mentoring or teaching who have a very, very different idea as to what a boardroom likes, but also a design table looks like. So, inevitably it's this. But the reality is that, and this is a big issue with everything, is that we've designed for scale. We've not designed for abundance. We've not designed for prosperity. And I just read, I'm going to find a quote that I just read today, which is amazing, which talks about the capitalist system and how we operate. And it resonated with me. Is from Jason Hickel. And it says, capitalism produces ecological crisis for the same reason it produces inequality. Because the fundamental mechanism of capitalist growth is that capital must extract from nature and from labor more than it gives in return. And one of the things that I have noticed is that we always talk, even when I was a young designer, the reason why many people considered us less successful is because we weren't upscalable, but we were replicable. And that is so much more important. Look at now, 20 years after I started my brand, more than 20 years after I started my brand, how many tiny rubbish collectors as I used to call myself, how many there are. And, there is no need for either one of them to become the king or queen of the situation. There is a massive need for them to influence hundreds of thousands to follow in their footsteps. So, we're seeing this, we are seeing a generation of designers that are not interested in growth for the sake of growing. And that to me is one of the most positive, one of the most hopeful messages that I receive as a teacher and as a tutor and as a mentor. That when I say, oh my God, that might not sell very much, it's like, well, okay. It's still important doing it, it's still part of the collection or whatever. And this is very refreshing and very new. And I guess upcycling is difficult in itself to gigantify. So for me, I go by that rule. We don't just exponentially growth. We look at prosperity before growth. We look at people before profits. And, we look at using what we've got and regenerate at the same time, way before we start making anything new.
Yeah. It sounds like, and, I think a big system change, and maybe Christina, you can speak to this, both of you, of course, but Christina, you were talking about the impact business that you were learning about early on in your career. So it sounds to me like the business models, not just about the manufacturing and the production and the design, but it's about the business models and what we're driving towards with those business models needs to change. What are your thoughts on that? If we were investing into the people that created the brand and it wasn't so super capitalistic, could we have a people, planet, and profit industry where people were everything and everybody was thriving?
I think that's why we get up every day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Wherever we are in whatever stage of our business life or design life, that's what we're striving for. And it is a nirvana whether we get there or not. Really, lifetimes be at the essence of what we believe in. Otherwise, that is the vision, to create something that's equitable and good. I wanted to just come back, if I may, and to share something as Ursula was speaking on, really the role of the designer, and specifically that designer who might go and work for a big business. Coming back to the role of the designer, we've always really tried to believe, and Ursula, you questioned it, and I understand why, but we've tried to believe that 80% of the environmental impact of a product is laid down at the design stage. Because we really want to empower these designers to know how important they are. And so, not egotistical, but important. And from my point of view, through the Redress Design Award, what we've tried to do is make the designer feel like an activist, give them the confidence to go out there and whatever they're going to do, give them the spirit to fight hard for it. Because whether they go into a big company, small company, whatever, we don't care. They're micro influencers who are infiltrating big businesses and small businesses. And I have to say that because I've been doing this not as long as Ursula, but let's just say 14 years. And I've made so many friends on the supply chain side, so many people that I've grown up with in the last 14 years. And they are now decision makers in many big companies. And they've all started off with a spark and a passion and a commitment. And what I would say to designers who might think, oh, what is this 80%? How am I going to do it? I really care, but I don't know what to do. I would say, get out there, have a go, be persistent and be patient, because just as Ursula said, and I took notes because I always enjoy listening to you, but often we're not aware that we're starting a process until it's done. And so to that point, I would say to people, never give up and go and have a good crack, whatever company that you go to, because, and another reason why I fell in love with fashion, Patrick, on another question that you gave me, is because I came to know, learn from, respect so many people working on the supply chain. Pioneers, activists working in like auditing companies, chemical companies, big fashion brands that, we love to scream and shout about fast fashion brands. Well, I know many people who are absolutely incredible. They could be on this panel. They are as passionate as we are. So I just wanted to say that because everyone can do it, actually, a little bit, piece by piece.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Yeah.
Which is something really interesting that's been happening to me recently is that, so I get obviously contacted by young designers that want to be, mentored by me or my advice. And I really try to respond to as many as I possibly can, whether it's just a 15-minute Skype session or Zoom session, whatever. I really try my hardest. And many are working from big companies as junior designers or junior, accessories and so on. And they say, I can't keep working here because it really doesn't match my principle. This is not my work ethic. And the list comes, from the waste to the over hour to the attitude and blah, blah, blah. I want to leave. And what they're really asking me is permission to go. And unfortunately, what I have to say is stay. Stay and meet your mates. Meet everybody else in that company, in other departments that are not necessarily designing a piece of clothing, but they're designing something else anyway, because this is fashion. And so, the system, the package, it doesn't matter. Get together with others that have that same calling. That is ultimately what will change the enormous companies that seemingly now are trying to turn this ship around. There's 3 people trying to turn that ship around, and the captain still wants money. When we start getting the surge of people that will say, no, we'll do it together, then those ships will change their route, their course. And that's what we need. Those people, valuable, valued people inside
Yeah. Well, I have to say those 2 people that I'm looking at right now are you. You've definitely changed the course of how so many people in the industry, designers, even consumers, brands, companies, global stakeholders have changed how they look at it. So I want to, first of all, applaud you and thank you so much. I have some sad news because we're coming to the end of our time. I could talk to you guys all day. So we have 3 minutes left. And I just want to know if you could leave us with one last thing, and we can continue the conversation hopefully another time. But can you leave us with one final note about what, about something that has to do with designing for change, a step forward, whether it's a designer or a company or a stakeholder? And I'll shut up now so you can talk. Ursula, maybe we start with you.
Cool. Well, I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about Fashion Revolution, as this is
Got
my
it.
last few seconds.
Yeah.
And yes, please follow Fashion Revolution. Follow Fashion Revolution for 2021. We are really talking about relationships. I've written something recently that respect for nature demands unequivocal respect between its people. And this is something that we can all have a part at designing. Mm-hmm. Treating each other as equals is the one technology, the one, non-technology that we really tried. So for me, everything depends on that and on that story.
That's amazing. And that will change a system for sure. And we absolutely will. Thank you so much, Ursula. Christina, how about you?
Mine is actually the word resilience. Resilience in every department is, we are going through COVID, and that's, called on us to be resilient in, the way that we live. But I think as fashion professionals, resilience to overcome the frustration, the difficulty, the barriers, the hurdles, the question, full resilience to push on through. And that means not giving up, because it certainly will not be easy. And to also have a lot of patience, because it takes a very, very long time.
Yeah. Well, you guys, we're so grateful to have this conversation, and we're going to provide a follow-up with all of the tips and resources and guides, because there's so much dense knowledge that we couldn't get to today, but we will absolutely provide that to our community, and maybe even some more conversations in the future. But it was just so wonderful spending time with you. Thank you so much. It was so valuable, and congratulations. And we look forward to following you and supporting you in your journey from now until forever. So thank you so much.
It's nice to speak to you.
Obrigado.